9 Things Johnny Carson Took to the Grave. For 3 decades he was the king of late night, an unshakable presence in America's living rooms, 5 nights a week. And yet for someone who appeared more than 20,000 times on television, few people ever truly knew the man behind the curtain. Johnny Carson wasn't just a comedian or television icon, he was a performance in progress, a carefully constructed illusion brought to life night after night. The crowd felt close to Johnny. The audience felt like they'd grown up with him, but that connection was mostly one way. Carson was, above all else, a master of presence and a guardian of absence. Even those who worked just feet away from him on the set of The Tonight Show often describe him the same way: warm on stage, ice cold off of it. He'd deliver a flawless monologue, charm the pants off a nervous guest, light up the country with his grin, and then vanish the moment the cameras stopped rolling. His exit was so consistent it became a kind of mythology in the building. Carson didn't linger, didn't mingle. When the red light went off, so did he. But why? What was he hiding? What pain, truth, or vulnerability was so deeply guarded that even his closest collaborators never got full access? In this video we'll unpack 9 secrets Johnny Carson took to the grave, fragments of a long, complicated, and often lonely life that even biographers haven't fully pieced together. These aren't just untold stories, they're insights into a man who understood that silence might be the last true form of power. Number 9. The real reason he disappeared from the spotlight. When Johnny Carson retired in 1992, he didn't just step away from The Tonight Show, he stepped away from visibility entirely. No farewell memoir, no comeback tour, not even a heartfelt documentary appearance to look back on his legacy. While modern celebrities often treat retirement as a new stage of reinvention, promoting brands, appearing in films, or writing introspective books, Carson did the opposite. He vanished, and not in the metaphorical sense. He refused television interviews, dodged press inquiries, and declined millions of dollars in offers for one-night returns. Even when David Letterman begged for a brief late-night reunion, Carson politely said no. So the question naturally arises, was his retirement a reward or a retreat? According to sources close to him, Carson valued privacy above all else. Fame, in his view, was a transaction. You gave a performance, but you didn't owe the world a piece of your soul. But some insiders believe the silence meant something more. That behind the quiet Malibu mornings and hobbyist sailboat rides was a man who felt burned out, emotionally weathered by decades of performance. His producer, Peter Lassily, once noted, Johnny didn't want to become one of those stars the audience pitied. He wanted people to remember him at the top, and yet that deliberate vanishing act stirred more curiosity than any attention-grabbing reappearance ever could. His phone continued to ring with interview requests until the very end. His absence became its own kind of presence. People speculated. Was he happy? Was he still writing jokes? Did he regret not saying more before slipping into the shadows? Johnny never answered. And when he passed away in 2005, he left that question hanging, perfectly timed, like one of his best punchlines. Number 8. The Joan Rivers feud, and what he never said. Carson's falling out with Joan Rivers is one of the most talked about splits in entertainment history. She was not only his permanent guest host, she was seen by millions as his logical successor. She filled in for Johnny when he was away, praised him in public, and credited him for launching her career. Then in 1986, Joan signed a late-night deal of her own with Fox, reportedly without telling Johnny directly. His response? Permanent exile. Carson never mentioned her on air again. She was blacklisted from The Tonight Show for almost 30 years. What made that silence so remarkable was its totality. Rivers, until her death in 2014, kept trying to mend fences. She wrote letters, left voicemails, publicly expressed remorse, and yet Johnny ignored every attempt. Colleagues recall that even off-air the topic was forbidden. She's banned, he said on the day the news broke, and that was the last they heard on the subject for the rest of his life. Was it solely professional betrayal, or something deeper, perhaps paternal protectiveness, mixed with disappointment? Carson was a fiercely private man, but Joan wasn't just another guest, she was someone he trusted. Someone who had a backstage pass to his rare emotional soft spots. Whether he felt angry, abandoned, or heartbroken, we may never know. He carried it in silence, and in the end that silence may have held more weight than any condemnation. And here's where the mystery deepens further. Johnny never explained his side. Not even anonymously, not even late in life. Friends wondered if he ever processed the anger privately, if he ever reached a point of forgiveness but refused to say it out loud. That kind of control, the decision not to participate in your own myth, is what sets Johnny Carson apart. He withheld not to punish, but to preserve something he never explained, something only he understood. To the casual viewer, Johnny Carson and Bob Hope were two legends cut from the same cloth, icons of American comedy, bridging generations of television gold. Carson introduced Hope with reverence, laughed dutifully at his punchlines, and praised his legacy with the same warmth one might show a lifelong friend. But according to those inside the studio walls, that friendship was mostly performance. As Hope aged, his appearances became increasingly stiff. He clung tightly to stacks of cue cards, rarely veering off script. While Carson thrived on spontaneity, Hope arrived ready to deliver one-liners and nothing else. He treated The Tonight Show not as a conversation, but as another stage for pre-written routines. According to one longtime writer, it wasn't a visit, it was a monologue, and Johnny hated it. Behind the scenes, Carson reportedly bristled at Hope's refusal to engage with him as a human being. Johnny would attempt to draw Bob out, ask about his USO tours, his politics, his wartime influence on America's morale. Hope, the legend, would nod politely, then pivot back to the flashcards. If Carson was the jazz musician of talk shows, improvisational, responsive, emotionally tuned, Hope felt like sheet music printed decades ago, recited by rote. Despite this, Carson never let the tension show. He kept inviting Hope back, even late into the 80s when the disconnect had become glaringly obvious. Some say it was respect, others say it was obligation. NBC, after all, owed much of its comedy roots to Hope. But there was also an undercurrent of something deeper: duty. Carson valued legacy. He knew what Hope symbolized to American entertainment, even if in private it felt like propping up a wax figure, as one staffer memorably described it. Perhaps what annoyed Johnny even more was that these appearances felt inauthentic. For a man who spent his career revealing truth through humor, the artifice became insulting. But true to form, he never uttered a critical word in public, never broke character, never aired the real frustrations bubbling just beneath that famous smirk. And he took every bit of that quiet resentment to the grave. Number 6. The unspoken relationship with his father. Johnny Carson rarely spoke about his childhood, even less about his father. In interviews, he distilled his past into a few vague lines about growing up in the Midwest and learning magic tricks as a boy. But those who knew him closely sensed a darker undercurrent, one that permeated his personality long into adulthood. Carson's authorized biography refers to his father as distant, but stops just short of identifying the emotional weight that label carried. His second wife, Joanne, described two very different Johnnies: the sparkling entertainer America knew, and the withdrawn, emotionally evasive man at home. He was like smoke, she once said. You could see him, feel his presence, but you could never touch him. Psychologists and biographers who studied Carson's life noted patterns: difficulty with emotional intimacy, intense perfectionism, and a need for absolute control. One of them wrote, "It's the classic child of criticism profile: brief praise followed by silence, or worse, disapproval." Carson never confirmed these theories. He never denied them either. He simply refused to engage. Close friends say bringing up his father was a conversational dead end. He'd shut down or change the subject, often mid-sentence. This silence about his early years stood in contrast to how most modern celebrities approach their past. Today, fame nearly requires confession, addiction stories, parental trauma, spiritual journeys. Carson was part of a generation that believed in stoicism, resilience, that privacy was a form of dignity, not evasion. He didn't believe in blaming the past for the present, and yet that rigidity, the emotional lockbox, shaped so much of who he was. In private, he displayed occasional flashes of frustration or mood swings that startled staff and spouses alike. Those moments were rare, but revealing. One producer recalled, "Sometimes you'd see Johnny hit a wall emotionally, like something had surfaced, something old. But just as fast as it came, it was gone." What emotional ghosts were hiding in that silence? What conversations never happened between father and son? Even near the end of his life, Carson chose not to reflect publicly on those early influences. Unlike many public figures, who treat memoirs as either therapy or marketing, he saw them as indulgent. Instead of penning a final chapter, he honored his father by doing the one thing he always did best, staying silent. Number 5. The mystery of his inner circle. Despite being the most viewed man in America for 30 years, there was almost no one who could truly claim to have known Johnny Carson. He kept his social world tight, surgically tight. Unlike most Hollywood stars, he didn't blaze through entourages or pack parties with hangers-on. His idea of friendship was selective, borderline surgical. Most people assumed Ed McMahon, his iconic sidekick, was also his closest confidant. After all, Ed laughed at every joke, shared the couch on every show, and stood beside Johnny in nearly every defining moment. But insiders say that their relationship was strictly professional, more of an on-stage rhythm than a backstage rapport. They rarely saw each other off-set, said one staff member. Ed resected Johnny's walls. Everyone did. Names floated in and out over the years. His younger brother Dick, his longtime producer Peter Lassily, his former lawyer Henry Bushkin. Each had moments of proximity, hints that maybe they had climbed inside the inner sanctum, but then separation. Each of them eventually drifted, stepping away with affectionate bittersweet language, but never satisfied answers. Bushkin in particular, wrote about his falling out with Carson after years of serving as advisor, lawyer, and sometimes emergency fixer. They shared an intense partnership, and then, one day it ended. No explanation, no grand confrontation, just distance. That's how Carson managed relationships. When you crossed a certain emotional line, or even if you got too close, he'd pull back until the door quietly shut behind you. This mystery extended into his retirement, where few visitors were welcomed into his Malibu compound. No tabloid photos, no high society sightings, just wind, books and the sea. Some might call that loneliness, but Carson would have called it peace. Johnny Carson interviewed every sitting U.S. president from Kennedy to Clinton, either on the Tonight Show stage or conversationally behind camera. Politicians grinned when they sat across from him, hoping for a bump in public favor. Americans, tens of millions strong, looked to Carson as a kind of national compass, not just for comedy, but for cultural cues. Yet in those 30 years, he never once revealed his own politics. That wasn't an accident. He wasn't a political, of course. Friends who knew him well describe a man with sharp, precise views, but Carson believed something radical, at least by today's standards, that a comedian's job wasn't to influence, it was to release tension, not create more of it. Writers from his team later revealed Carson was often deeply informed on world affairs. He read multiple newspapers daily, annotated headlines, discussed policy with writers before shows, not for activism, but for balanced mockery. He made a joke about Carter 1 minute, and Reagan the next, said a staff member. Everyone got teased equally, and that balance wasn't lazy, it was deliberate, strategic. Privately, Carson leaned toward fiscal conservatism, with socially moderate views. A personal friend once recalled him saying, "I want smaller government, and bigger laughs." But that's as close as anyone ever came to a statement of political philosophy. He didn't campaign, he didn't lecture, he didn't pretend his comedy was saving the country. The contrast to today's late night is glaring. Comedians today frequently double as political pundits, critics, even cultural warriors. Carson never saw that as his role. He often warned young comics not to chase applause by speaking truth to power, but to earn laughs by revealing absurdity. He claimed each side of an issue had flaws worth exposing, and comedy was most powerful when it reminded people not to take the system, or themselves, too seriously. Still, some found his silence disappointing. In the Reagan years especially, liberal viewers longed for Johnny to speak out, to endorse, oppose, take a stand. But Carson took a different stand entirely, the stand of non-disclosure. To this day, we don't know how he voted, we don't know if he ever filed a donation. He offered jokes, not judgment, satire, not slogans, and when the red light turned off, whatever private reactions he had to the state of the nation walked out the studio door with him, into silence. For a man so thoroughly in sync with American culture, that distance wasn't avoidance, it was restraint, a rare form of professionalism we rarely see now. He wasn't the country's conscience, he was its reprieve. Number 3. Did he ever regret retiring? Night. America wept as the credits rolled. The standing ovation lasted minutes, and then, like that, he was gone. No new show, no studio spin-off, no Where Are They Now? tours. In an industry where stars fade slowly, often clinging to the limelight in increasingly awkward attempts to remain relevant, Carson's exit was almost unnatural, clean, intentional, total. But did he ever miss it? That was the question whispered every year after. Did he ever want to come back? Publicly, Carson gave no indication. He turned down millions to do guest appearances, rejected every invitation to host award shows, and politely but consistently declined interviews about his past. The only glimpse we ever got was through David Letterman. Carson quietly faxed jokes to him, setups and punchlines that Letterman occasionally used in monologues. A secret signal to savvy fans: Johnny still had the instinct. It was like passing comedy DNA forward, joked one writer. You knew Johnny was out there, still watching, still writing, but only in shadows. Those who visited him in retirement describe a peaceful life: ocean views, crossword puzzles, quiet nights. He read voraciously, practiced his magic tricks, played tennis. He'd fulfilled his destiny and accepted his exit. And yet the silence felt so heavy. He never published a memoir, never gave a wrap-up or final say on his experience. Did he feel sadness, relief, nostalgia? One friend revealed that Carson was often nostalgic in small ways, laughing at an old clip, or relaying a behind-the-scenes joke from the 1970s, but would quickly pivot away. His wife recalled once finding him sitting in a chair, watching an old monologue. When she asked what it felt like to see himself younger, quicker, at the top of his game, he shrugged and said, "Feels like watching someone else." This speaks volumes. Carson didn't see his legacy as a mirror. He saw it more like a transmission, something he sent out into the world. What the world did with it, not his concern anymore. Some believe he feared what a return might do to his image, that even one awkward appearance could shatter the crystal perfection of that last good night. Others believe it was sheer exhaustion, that 30 years of broadcasting had drained something so deeply that he simply refused to go back. But then again, we don't know, and that's the point. Johnny Carson didn't just walk away from the stage. He walked away from self-commentary, silence, again, as statement. Number 2, the breakdown episodes, and how he hid them. This one may be the most shocking. Throughout his run on The Tonight Show, there were times when Johnny Carson would suddenly disappear. The audience would be told he was ill. Sometimes it was framed as a vacation, a work break, or scheduling gap. Guest hosts would fill in. The wheels kept spinning, but within the walls of NBC, whispers began to circle. Producers later admitted Carson suffered at least 2 or 3 severe emotional episodes, breakdowns, by any other name. One came during his divorce, another after the Joan Rivers debacle, a third one never confirmed, allegedly hit him during the peak of his success, when ratings were sky high, but his personal life was in tatters. Details are scarce. Carson never spoke publicly about his mental health. The idea of revealing a psychological crack in your armor was in his world unthinkable. Public vulnerability was weakness. He came from a generation that believed in swallowing emotion, not expressing it. But crew members noticed long silences before showtime, moments when Carson would retreat midday, tape delayed or canceled altogether, and yet not once, in 30 years, did he acknowledge a personal crisis on air. Johnny Carson never said goodbye, in the way America expected. He didn't write a memoir. He didn't sit for an hour-long farewell interview with Barbara Walters. He didn't release parting thoughts, or publish any final words for the audience he entertained for a generation. His last good night on The Tonight Show was simply no post-show reflection, no carefully worded statement. That silence was more than a finale. It was a philosophy. So what was Carson's true view of his own legacy? What did he want to be remembered for? Did he care how he was remembered at all? Some say he didn't, that he saw retrospectives as ego trips, a kind of narrative manipulation, designed to extend relevance past its natural expiration. He was never trying to reinvent himself. He simply believed that once it was over, it was over. Others suggest something more deliberate and controlled, that Carson understood the media machine, understood that legacies aren't created by final interviews, but by the cumulative effect of what you don't say. The mystery, the restraint, the refusal to play the legacy game became the legacy itself. He could have defined the narrative, reflected one television historian. Instead he left the frame empty, and let the public paint over it. It's hard to overstate how rare that is. Most public figures shape their legacies with chess-like precision.
They tweet, post, podcast, write. Every headline, every quote, every talking point becomes a brick in the carefully constructed story they wish the world to remember. Carson, meanwhile, believed that a performer's work should speak louder than their explanations of it. More importantly, he feared that over-explaining would strip the art of its power. The minute you start talking about your place in history, Carson once said quietly in passing, you've admitted your history is over. He didn't want to be a talking statue. He didn't want to be honored while he was still living, still breathing, still very much a man who dreamed, laughed, felt. Honoring himself was something he found vaguely embarrassing. What quotes it chilling is how complete that decision was. Even after death, there was no parting statement left behind, no letter, no public message. It was as though his legacy was intentionally left unfinished, so others could decide for themselves what he meant. The final irony, a man who talked for a living, and hid his truth. If you step back and look at these 9 mysteries collectively, from Joan Rivers and Bob Hope to his father, politics, and private mental health, what emerges isn't just a portrait of a mysterious man, it's a philosophy, a way of managing public life and personal boundaries that now feels almost alien in the era we live in. Carson wasn't mysterious by accident, he was mysterious by design. He believed that intimate truths were not for public consumption, not because he was ashamed or secretive, at least not always, but because he believed truth should be preserved, for the self, for the few people who earned it, for the person staring back from the mirror, not the person smiling into the camera. His gifts were enormous, his comedic rhythm impeccable, his timing, surgical. Just watch any moment where a guest fumbles, flirts or flounders. Johnny's eyes flash, a microsecond passes, and he lands a line that not only rescues the moment, but elevates it. His genius wasn't showy, it was pristine and protected. So it's no surprise he carried that same precision off camera. Mass exposure didn't interest him. Intimacy, in the way we define it today, seemed chaotic, risky, vulgar. And we live now in a completely opposite world. Social media rewards oversharing. Talk show monologues become political manifestos. Every celebrity memoir is a confessional booth. But Carson came from a different template. He believed that the audience deserved entertainment, not enlightenment. Truth, yes, but not his personal truth. He knew fame could elevate you, but it could also consume you. So he devised rules, guardrails. His entire career was a case study in the power of restraint. Each of the 9 things he took with him to the grave reflects a discipline that feels almost radical today. He didn't gift wrap his trauma for viewers. He didn't weaponize his emotions for applause. He didn't let loyalty become liability. He didn't turn mistakes into marketable memoirs. He lived his contradictions quietly, loved from a distance, worked at the highest level, and then refused to write the final chapter himself. He let it end. And when he passed in 2005, a new wave of creators took the mic. They were louder, rawer, more digital, but none of them, none ever quite replaced Johnny. Because you can't replace what you never fully knew. Johnny Carson was America's most intimate stranger, a reflection of us all, somehow. And when he left the stage, he made sure no one else could follow. It's easy now, nearly 20 years after his death, to mythologize Johnny Carson as a relic from another age. The quiet giant, the gentleman comic, the stone-faced maestro of late-night subtlety. And in many ways, he was all of those things. But what the modern world often forgets is just how revolutionary he was, by being quiet in a world that was about to get infinitely louder. At the time of his retirement in 1992, reality TV hadn't peaked. Social media didn't exist. There was no TMZ shadowing celebrities from their front doors to their parking garages. Famous people still had control. Carson just chose to use it differently. While others started building brands out of their personal lives, Johnny closed the door and drew the blinds. Even then it felt different. He didn't want followers or fans. He wanted viewers, people who understood that a performer's life happened on screen, and that what you didn't see wasn't your business. Fast forward to now, and Carson's model feels almost alien. We live in a culture that values transparency above all else. Vulnerability is currency. Stars live stream their breakdowns, tweet their arguments, create confessionals from inside back seats of luxury cars. Therapists go viral for hot takes. Everyone's truth is for public viewing. And within that chaos, Johnny Carson seems to stand taller than before, like a minimalist monument built with deliberate omission. His refusal to commodify his pain, a kind of dignity, his conscious withholding of opinion, a kind of mastery, his ability to navigate three wildly different decades of American culture, 1960s rebellion, 1970s skepticism, and 1980s excess, without ever changing who he was or pandering to a trend. That was no accident, that was calculated discipline, and that's something even his harshest critics respected. He may have been emotionally distant, he may have left relationships raw, regrets unresolved, questions unanswered, but he never once betrayed his inner compass. He drew the line, and kept to it, year after year, joke after joke. To some that sort of stoicism is outdated, cold, maybe even selfish. Don't we deserve to understand our heroes? Shouldn't someone with that much power and presence over the American psyche at least tell us what they believed, who they loved, what they feared? But that's the genius of Carson's silence. It wasn't a void, it was a message. By choosing not to tell us everything, he told us something significant. You can't give the world your soul and expect to keep your peace. You must choose. Johnny chose peace. He refused to be dissected like so many of his contemporaries. He didn't wait to be cancelled or decoded. He never trended, never chased virality. And because of that, he never became a caricature of who he once was. He left his performance behind, not his dignity. That lesson may be Carson's greatest legacy, bigger than the monologues, bigger than Here's Johnny, bigger than the animal segments, the self-deprecating zingers, the unstoppable grin that became a cultural memory for millions. In fact, if you step back, you start to wonder, maybe each of these 9 mysteries we've explored wasn't a mystery at all. Maybe they were deliberate boundaries. His feud with Joan Rivers, not pettiness principle. His discomfort with Bob Hope, not jealousy integrity. His silence about his father, not avoidance privacy. His political non-alignment, not apathy respect for the audience. His emotional absences during breakdowns, not weakness, self-preservation. The mystery of his closest friend, not evidence of loneliness, pride in selectivity. His refusal to return to TV, not bitterness commitment to finality. And his insistence on no memoir, no reflection, no legacy management, not arrogance philosophical consistency. Each unsaid word was its own paragraph, each boundary its own story. Carson didn't leave empty space behind. He left intended white space so we, the audience, would be forced to confront the performance ourselves. That's the difference between someone who disappears because fame forgets them, and someone who chooses to walk away, knowing the spotlight will chase them forever. He knew we'd spend decades asking these questions, debating his motives, guessing at his inner thoughts, trying to map the terrain of a man whose entire charisma came from being seen and never quite known. And now, almost 2 decades after his death, we're still doing it. Still watching reruns, still laughing at Ed's fake laugh, Karnak's bad predictions, and Johnny's sly grins. Still whispering about those moments behind the scenes when he didn't show up, or didn't forgive, or didn't say goodbye. Still measuring his words by the ones he never spoke. Because Carson's real act wasn't just late-night television. It wasn't the suits or the soundstage, or the millions of viewers. It was his mastery of absence. The mystery wasn't the result of a man who couldn't speak. The mystery was the design of a man who chose not to. And in a world full of noise, that decision might be the most shocking performance of all. With a man we welcomed into our homes for 30 years, and barely knew when he walked out the door. A man who redefined American entertainment, anchored an entire generation, and vanished like a magician taking a final bow. But Johnny Carson didn't vanish. Not really. He did something far more intentional. He withdrew. He left the camera behind, shut the door softly, and true to his comedic rhythm, never stepped on his own punchline. His legacy wasn't an accident. It wasn't forgotten. It was designed to linger in your memory the way a perfect joke does. Crisp, sharp, unresolved, alive. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. We didn't love Johnny Carson because we knew him. We loved Johnny Carson because we thought we did. He gave us just enough, precisely enough to make it feel that way. And like the great illusionists he admired in his youth, he pulled it off right in front of our eyes. He never lied. He just chose what not to include. And that is storytelling.